The things that I actually know about.
This is fun. So we're starting off with the Weekend Fund and the second iteration of this. This is a venture capital fund put together by the infamous / notorious / very nice Ryan Hoover, most famous for his work, I think, at Product Hunt.
Yeah.
Which was a, I don't know, dig / Reddit / what's new kind of like hot place to find.
Product discovery platform. That's how I described it in my story. But yeah, Ryan Hoover is the founder and CEO of Product Hunt, which was acquired by AngelList in 2016 for $20 million. He stayed on. They operated independently. He stayed on in his role, but he also kind of shifted his focus around that time to venture capital with a $3 million debut angel fund that he closed in 2017. Fast forward 2 more years, he's on to his second fund after investing in a bunch of interesting companies like Girl Boss, which I think most people are familiar with. It's sort of like a LinkedIn for women.
Sophia Amoruso.
Yes.
She did. She was in fashion before.
She had the company called Nasty Gal.
Mm-hmm.
There's a TV show about that, which is on Netflix. It's a good show. Actually, it's a really crappy show, but it's...
I'm glad you told me. I would have watched it because I read her book and I thought it was very good.
I read her book too. The show was canceled after 1 season. If you're into like kind of crummy shows about young women, like I tend to watch, it's enjoyable, but anyways, not critically acclaimed.
The book though is worth reading, I thought.
Yeah, the book she has an interesting story for sure. But anyways, that's one of his portfolio companies. TTYL is another one of his portfolio companies, which is like as far as I understand, it's a social media platform of sorts that's focused on audio. So kind of an interesting thing. Yeah, I mean,
that's cool, actually.
It's really cool, and it's an interesting site. I was looking at it yesterday a little bit. And Headspin, which is another one of his companies. This is a mobile application performance software company, pretty highly valued already. I think like $500-600 million valuation. So he's got a large portfolio of several companies that I recognize, and I'm sure that you would too. Doing well enough that he's on to his second fund, which is $10 million, and limited partners in the fund. Basically a ton of really famous VCs, Mark Andreessen, Chris Dixon, Jana Messerschmidt, Ben Rubin, Chris Sacca, Hunter Walk. I mean, the list goes on, as well as a bunch of entrepreneurs, founders.
So it's kind of all the cool kids put money in this fund. And here's a question I have about this, because that is a hilarious number of LPs who all wrote $100,000, $200,000 checks. So essentially not much money to them. Mark Andreessen wouldn't miss
tiny
$100K.
bit of money for them. And I think I read in Ryan Hoover's blog post that he'd written that there was like 100 LPs. Basically his might have been more. He said the reason he did this was that there would be a ton of advisors for his companies. Certainly could be the case. Could also be the case that he was only getting a little bit from each of them and he had to raise from a bunch of LPs to fill the fund. But more likely, because he has a good reputation, he is well known, as you said. More likely, he really did want sort of all these expertise kind of surrounding the fund, able to help with various companies.
I was looking at kind of the other perspective, though, kind of in reverse, which is these LPs are often people who are either looking for new opportunities to build things or new opportunities to invest. So in a sense, he's kind of doing a scout type effort for them. Like scouts, if you don't know, are people associated with a large fund, say Sequoia, and they have access to some small amount of capital, and they can go out and write these really early stage checks without getting the kind of the big corporate name involved. And so if you get visibility into what Ryan's doing, he does have a good eye for what's hot, what's next, and so forth. It strikes me as a very reasonable place to put money.
Yeah, I think it's one of the big trends that we've noticed, and we've talked about it before. I don't remember why we talked about it, but there are these entrepreneurs. They're well connected. They're almost like pawns for these larger funds. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but like they get funding from other VCs who work at like Sequoia or Lightspeed or Benchmark or whatever it might be, and they use them to get into hot deals. We talked about it when we talked about Superhuman, because the founder of Superhuman was potentially raising a fund. He was backed, or he's really, really in with the Andreessen Horowitz guys. I think it's sort of like maybe they're using him to get in on some of these early stage deals. Not that these companies don't want to work with Andreessen, but I guess it's just sort of like getting more people out there and
Andreessen can't put a lot of time into a $200,000 check. And so if you need someone who can do that, you just cut off a chunk of the money and, essentially federate it out. I think Indie.vc just announced a bunch of new scouts as well.
A ton of them.
Ashley Mayer, now Glossier, formerly of Box. And I saw, it made me on my Twitter feed feel really, really Silicon Valley based when like multiple people were like, I'm a scout now. And I'm like, crap, at the same time.
Yeah, I was just coming back from vacation, or I was like maybe on my last day of vacation when I saw that news. But I didn't actually see the news of what was happening, but I just kept seeing all these tweets that were like, I'm a scout. And I was like, what? Why is everyone all of a sudden a scout for NDVC? But that's because there was a big announcement.
Also, when I was growing up, being a scout wasn't very cool. I meant you were in Boy Scouts, and now it's like the coolest thing in Silicon Valley.
I mean, it
terms have changed.
It's pretty cool because like if you're a CEO of a company, like I met with this one really awesome CEO of, I can't remember the name, but it's a med tech sort of thing, and she was a scout for Sequoia, and she was just saying, she's like, every so often I meet a really cool company and I basically just shoot them a note being like, hey, this is cool, you should invest, and then if they agree, they do, and then she gets I don't know whether it's just a check right then or it's a cut of the company or whatever it is, but it's a pretty nice setup because it doesn't require really her to do any work. She's just existing and going about her day, and she comes into contact with these companies because of course she does. She's in that ecosystem.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty sweet deal. I think
it's like an early earthquake detection system for cool companies that might change the game. And I think everyone's looking to get in early, as early as possible on whatever's going to be the next big thing. And then they want to just foie gras with money. Last thing on this really quick, we have seen a lot of funds get larger over time. Another example of that, this is a much larger fund. We've also seen not every fund that starts off with a small amount of capital make it to a second iteration. So we presume Ryan was doing a little bit better than most. And I think I would call this a nano fund, Kate, back to our discussion about nomenclature.
We talked about this before we taped because I was reading an article on Crunchbase News about small funds, essentially, and they differentiated between a sub $25 million fund and a sub $100 million fund. So a sub $25 million fund is a nano fund. So I had never heard this term, but I like it because it helps you be really specific about what it is you're covering. Yep. Sub $100 million fund, so probably between 25 and 100 million, that's a micro fund. So I'm someone who typically just says micro fund referring to all of those, but like if you want to be really specific, you can differentiate between nano and micro. So maybe I'll try to do that from now on to be more clear.
It's helpful. I used to make fun of the idea of pre-seed. Like, isn't pre-seed just seed? But I've also realized
it helps.
It does help. So more striations, the better.